This is one more horrific tragedy among so many in Gaza. And I was there just a few weeks ago. Uh, while at the moment when we were getting aid in, we were about halfway through the ceasefire, and we were saving many of the survivors. We were getting food and medicine and shelter to those who so badly need it. And of course, now we've been a month since that ceasefire ended. And in that time, the food is rotting at the borders, the medicine is going out of date. We can't get those support to people who are in desperate, desperate need. And as you described there, my colleagues were pulling the bodies of medics out of shallow graves in Gaza over the last few days. I've just come from a telephone call with one of my colleagues who was there doing exactly that. And these are horrors, and they're happening before our eyes right now.
Have you spoken to the Israelis about this? As we said, the IDF issued a statement. They say they were targeting Hamas operatives, that the vehicles looked suspicious. And as far as they're concerned, they killed Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists.
So one of the things that we haven't been able to do to the same extent as in the past is actually work with the Israeli authorities to do what we call deconfliction, which is to try to make sure that humanitarian convoys are clearly notified and avoided. Now, that wasn't always happening in the past, but it certainly isn't happening now. And so the risk of these kind of attacks against humanitarians, let's be clear, these are ambulance drivers. They're the people who go back towards the survivors in order to try to save them. All we can do, we carry on. We try to deliver for the survivors. We try to get as much aid in to those who need it. And we demand accountability. We demand answers, and we call on the international community, the Security Council, and others, anyone who still has any influence at all over Israel, to insist that this must stop.
But you're not getting accountability or answers in this moment. And certainly the United States isn't holding Israel accountable.
No, quite the opposite. I mean, if anything, what we're seeing at the moment is a situation in which the scale of this conflict, the ferocity of this military offensive is being cheered on from some quarters. And those parts of the international system that are trying to stand up for humanitarian law, for human rights, are being themselves attacked for doing that. So it's a pretty desperate moment. And it's not just a desperate moment for the civilians of Gaza, although they are really at the epicenter of the humanitarian crises that are rattling the world right now. It's a huge setback for international law, for the scaffolding, the laws that we created as an international community to try to protect the most vulnerable people. And those are being trashed right now.
Well, we know that the Trump administration has made it clear that they don't want to adhere to these laws, even though these systems were built by the United States 80 years ago. But are you disappointed in European leaders who are still talking about the importance of adhering to values, to international law, to the protection of humanitarian workers? And yet, when it comes to the situation in Gaza, there is frankly, silence. I mean, every now and then there is condemnation, but there doesn't seem to be any real leadership coming out from the Europeans either.
Well, I think it's fair to say that there's silence, actually. I was in the Security Council last week, briefing them on the situation in Gaza, and there was unequivocal condemnation from 14 of the members of that Security Council around the table.
So I guess this is the question. Is it enough? Is what they're saying enough? Are the condemnations enough?
Well, clearly not, because the attacks on humanitarian workers are continuing. And it's not just in Gaza, of course. We've lost 84 humanitarian colleagues in Sudan, for example. As I say, last year was the deadliest year on record to do humanitarian work. Now, we'll carry on doing that. I couldn't restrain my people, if I wanted to, from going back towards the survivors of these conflicts, of these crises, to try to help them, to try to save those lives. But it's a pretty appalling situation when I can't guarantee their safety and when I can't turn to the international community and insist that they do.
You just said there that in some quarters we're seeing the cheering on of the ferocity of this. Which quarters and exactly who?
Well, I think America has made clear that its support for Israel at this moment is unequivocal, and that there isn't a message of restraint, as there might have been, as there certainly was I've worked on the Middle East for 20, 30 years now, and there normally was a message of restraint from Washington. Now, that's not happening right now. And that's not to say that there shouldn't be an effort to get the hostages back. There certainly should. I went to Nir Oz kibbutz myself just before going into Gaza. I met the survivors there. 1 in 4 people there were killed or taken hostage. So I completely understand the desire to get the hostages out, to get them home. But the ferocity of this military offensive is not the way to do that. The negotiations were working. The ceasefire, and we were very involved in getting those hostages out in that period, was working. We were getting people home to their loved ones.
And now, as you say, a month ago, this ceasefire broke down. Many people weren't surprised by that. Donald Trump himself talked about the fact that he was the one that pushed this and got this over the line. And I was in Doha when Steve Witkoff was there, and the Qatari Prime Minister said that we hope and look forward to the different phases of this ceasefire. And not only has the ceasefire broken down, but for the last month or so, the UN is saying that the aid is not getting in. There is no food or humanitarian assistance being allowed into Gaza. Israel says, that is not true. There is sufficient food going into Gaza. Your reaction, response to that?
So it's true that during that ceasefire period, we were getting huge amounts of aid in, and we reached 2 million people. We saved hundreds of thousands of lives in that period, 600 trucks a day, 20,000 trucks overall. This was enormous amounts of aid. And much of that aid now is on the verge of running out, because it has been a month since we were allowed to get aid in. We've been stopped from delivering aid. We've been told that we're not allowed to deliver that aid. And so there's only a tiny, tiny fraction of what is needed to stop massive starvation and disease in Gaza right now. It's happening in front of our eyes. We're demanding that access, and we're not getting it.
Are they giving a reason as to why they're not allowing you in, why you've been stopped?
They're saying that they want to completely control the delivery of aid right now. But they're not saying it to us, but elements of the Israeli cabinet are saying out loud that this is to put more pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. So they're saying that it's a deliberate strategy of withholding aid in order to get the hostages released.
Are you saying that then there is a deliberate starvation of the people of Gaza?
This is what the elements of the Israeli cabinet have been saying, that this is a deliberate policy of withholding aid in order to put pressure on the people of Gaza, but ultimately on Hamas.
I just want to move your attention to another major humanitarian crisis, which is, of course, Sudan. We're nearing the 2-year anniversary of that conflict. We know the military has taken over large parts of Khartoum, but the peril, the danger, the humanitarian crisis for the people of Sudan is not over.
Absolutely not. And if Gaza is noteworthy for the concentration of the killing, the intensity of the killing, Sudan is noteworthy for the scale of the death and destruction. We need to reach 30 million people right now, but also the savagery of the violence that the Sudanese people have experienced, including, as I heard from so many survivors, just appalling sexual violence that's been used as a weapon of war in this conflict. What we need is an end to the war. We need the parties to stop this conflict. And for that to happen, we need a proper, consolidated regional and international approach to peacemaking here, to basically saying enough is enough.
You're on your way to Myanmar. Obviously, we've seen the devastation there with the earthquake in that country. And obviously, this points to the fact that a country that is closed off, that is a military dictatorship, makes your job that much harder in accessing the most needy.
Need to get food, shelter, medicine in. We've got 25 search and rescue teams on the ground already. We're working with the regional parties as well, who are delivering a lot of in-kind support. But we've got to get in there and save as many lives as we can.